We are back for video post-production. You might notice that I'm filming everything down here in Rose Theater. I had to shoot some other videos down here, so I just figured I'd go ahead and shoot these little intros down here as well. So the lesson that we're going to be working on this week, and this is a little bit more complex, we're going to start digging deeper into 3D features in After Effects. We've done some 3D layer work so far, but we really haven't started incorporating things like camera layers and light layers. So that's going to be the main thing we work on in this lesson. It's really interesting how you can move the camera through 3D space. It's really like you can create this world and then use that camera to move around inside of that world. Same thing with lights. You're going to be able to create all kinds of different lighting looks just by adding light layers to a project. So let's go ahead and dig into this 3D features lesson. Okay, let's go ahead and get started with this lesson. You should find the footage items and also a project file that you'll need for this located on the Moodle page under the 3D features folder. So inside of that you'll see something called Lesson 11 Start Project. Let me go ahead and get mine open here. So I'm going to go Open Project. And you should see under yours something that says Lesson 11 Start. So we're going to go ahead and open that. It's going to give you this message that says this will be converted or must be converted. That's okay. And it should bring up a project with all these different footage items and layers already kind of intact, already created. And just to get this saved as something new, let's do save as, and maybe Lesson 11 Final or something like that. Okay, so what we've got here, we've got a 3D project, and some of the things we're going to want to do with this, we're going to want to animate a camera, we're going to want to add some lights, and maybe add some 3D movement. Before we dig in too much with adding new things, let me point out this camera layer that we have here on our timeline. This is something new. Anytime we're working in 3D, if you want to add a camera, that's going to give you the option of moving the camera through space, creating dolly effects, tilt, pan, all of those things are available to you with camera layers. Let's go ahead and dig a little bit into this layer. Now, if you do want to add a camera layer, you can go up to the Camera New, and there it is. Notice the shortcut. It looks kind of crazy, Control-Alt-Shift-C. But really, it's kind of simple. It's just every single modifier key you have and just with a C added to it. So our camera layer right here, let's go ahead and double click on the layer to open it up and see the camera settings. Whenever you create a new camera layer, it will ask you what you want those settings to be. It should default as 2-node. That's what we want for this project. You'll see presets here. This is basically your lens. Do you want a wide angle lens, a telephoto lens? This is kind of a normal lens that we've got working right here. So that allows you to get different looks with your lenses. You can change the film size. That probably isn't going to be something you mess with too much. You can click on this box right here that enables depth of field. That allows you to have items within the shot that are going to go out of focus, which can be kind of cool, but we'll leave that turned off for now. So there are lots of things you can play with here underneath the camera layer. Let's go ahead and just hit OK. So we're going to start animating that camera here in a second, but let's go ahead and mess around with this little graphic right here. Let's say we want this thing to animate into our project. Basically, we want it to slide into place. Okay, that should be easy enough, right? So we're going to go to 15 frames into our project, and let's go to our 3D text layer. That's what this is. I'll open up the position property. And let's say this is our final position for that graphic. So I will start the clock right there. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. So just press home or go back to 0. And let's go ahead and slide this thing off. Now you notice the arrows. I think we played with these arrows before. These allow you to drag the item up towards you or left, right. That's one we want to work with right now, the X value. So I'm just going to drag that off the screen until it's fully off. And you can see that basic animation right here, sliding in. And let's say we want to clean up that animation to make it smooth. You guessed it, we want to do some easy ease. So I'm going to click on the word position to highlight both of those keyframes. Hit F9 to add that easy ease to those keyframes. And I'll add or hit the position key to get rid of that value, and there we go. Okay, so you might notice that this surface kind of has a glass-like or an ice-like feel to it, which means items that are placed on top of that would tend to reflect. So it might be kind of cool to add a reflection effect. Well, when you're thinking about reflections, really what a reflection is, it's just a mirror image of something that would be underneath that object. So it makes sense, right? If we want to do a reflection of both of these items, we need to make a duplicate first, right? The duplicate layer will be the reflection layer. So let's do this. Let's do the text first. And let's make sure we're at 15 before we start this. So I'm going to go to my 3D text layer. I'm going to duplicate it, Control D. I'm going to rename this layer 3D text reflection. And I want this to be underneath the ground. So I'm going to drag this below my ground layer. This surface right here, that's the ground. Okay. Now I've got two of these stacked on top of each other right now, so I need to get the one kind of flipped to where it's underneath. So check this out. 3D text reflection, right click, transform, and then you're going to go to flip vertical. And that's going to flip it down underneath, which, okay, it looks okay, but reflections are going to have different qualities to it, right? They're going to be a little bit more blurry and a little bit more transparent. So we need to fix some of those values. In fact, let's go ahead and start with the opacity changes first. So I hit T to get to my opacity. And let's maybe drop that down to 30 just to make it look more like a reflection. We'll come back and add some blur to that in a moment. What we need to do now, though, is also add a reflection for the book. So I'll go to my book layer, Control D. I'm going to rename that book reflection. Drag that underneath ground. Same thing, right? Right click, transform, flip vertical. And then we need to do the same thing here, right? Transparency, opacity, 30%. And there we go. All right, so we've got them flipped. We've got them transparent, but we need to kind of make them a little bit blurred out because that's going to make the effect of the reflection, I think, a little bit more realistic. So if we want to change more than one layer, we just did that in the last lesson, right? We wanted to add some color correction to multiple layers. We added an adjustment layer to impact all of those. So let's go to our adjustment layer, and there it is, Control-Alt-Y. And we're going to just add some blur to this one. So just go right-click on your adjustment layer. Let's go find your effect menu. The one we're looking for is Blur and Sharpen. And then inside of blur and sharpen, let's go find directional blur. This is just a simple blur effect. All you have to do is go to blur length and just start dragging that until you get something you like. You could also change the blur direction on this, but you actually do want it to kind of be straight down like that. So the default should work fine for this one. And I'm going to go ahead and blur it all the way to 20 to get the look that I want. Okay, so let's save what we have there. And let's start playing with that camera. So we're going to go down to our camera layer, and we want to start animating the camera, start creating some camera moves. So you can probably guess we're going to do some things with position, right? Let's go to 4 seconds. That's where we're going to start doing a lot of this with the camera. So we're going to open up position. But there's another aspect to a camera that we need to think about. The position of a camera is the physical position of where it's at. So if we animate the position, just think of it as a dolly shot, right? We're going to be moving through space. But what about if we want to pan or tilt? Where is the camera pointing? That's another value, that's another control called point of interest. To get to point of interest, the shortcut for that is A, so we need to hit Shift A to have that opened up at the same time. So now we got point of interest and position for our camera. So let's go ahead and start the clock for both of those items at 4 seconds. And now let's back it up. Let's go to 10 frames. And this is where we want to start creating that animation. So I think the goal here is going to be to have the camera be far away from this initially, and then it's going to push in to this final close-up. So let's check this out. Let's go to the position for camera. And you see that Z value. The Z value is the one that controls how close or how far away the camera is to the subject. Notice as we start getting closer to 0, it gets closer to our objects, but we want to go further away. We're going to go way further away. Let's go minus 3,000. So basically we've pulled that camera all the way back across this icy surface, and we're going to dolly in to that book. And you see that working right there. I'll go back to 10. But let's also check out some other values. Let's check out the X position. Okay, that's the first value. Check out what happens here. Okay, there we see it kind of skating across. That's more like a tracking shot as we go along the X value. So let's give you a number for that one. Let's go minus 185. Now we're going to leave the Y value at 132, and don't move this right now, but let me just show you what happens here. This allows us to go physically up and down. It's almost like a pedestal shot, right? And we can raise the camera up high like this, looking down. So there's our movement for Y. But again, let's go back to 132 for that value. Okay, point of interest. Okay, that's where the camera is physically pointing, what it's looking at. So if I change these values, okay, there's my pan. So point of interest, X value, I'm panning the camera. Y value, I'm tilting. Z value is a little different. That's almost like, what are you focused on? Where's your focus point? That's what you should think of for the Z value. Okay, let's do this for point of interest. Just right-click on the word point of interest, and you'll see something that says reset. Hit reset, and that should get us where we want. Basically, this should be kind of in the center of the frame right now, the book. All right, let's add some easy ease to everything we've done. So I'm going to click on point of interest to select those two keyframes, and then I can shift click on position underneath to also select those. F9, I'm good to go. All right, let's go ahead and save that. Now, you probably noticed something odd. That whole thing we did with the animated text coming in is kind of stupid now, right? Because we see it in the frame the whole time, and then it slides in, and it just doesn't make any sense. We need to adjust the timing of when that comes in. Probably remember how to do this from other lessons, but let's go ahead and review it now. We need to change the endpoint, right? We need to change the endpoint of the 3D text, but it's not just the 3D text. Notice what else is attached to that. We've got that reflection that we're dealing with. So we need to select 3D text, but also the 3D text reflection. So I just control-clicked on 3D text reflection to make sure I had that selected. Now let's fix the timing. We're going to go forward to 323. This is when everything kind of arrives to a finish. So I'm going to have my endpoint change to 323. That is simply you pressing that left bracket key. That's the button right next to the letter P. So if you press that, that's going to push down the endpoint for those two layers, which will fix the timing. See, we don't see the text anymore. And then at 323, it starts to come in again. Okay, so there's our basic camera move. And again, we could do all kinds of things with the camera, but that's pretty cool, right? Just to be able to move through space, see those perspective changes happening. This is a fun thing to play with. Okay, we're going to save that, and we're going to start messing around with some light layers now. That's another aspect of the 3D world that you have control over. You can start adding lights. To add a light, that's that same shortcut we used for the camera. It's all the modifier keys, Control, Alt, Shift, but then we add an L onto that. So Control, Alt, Shift, L. There's our light. Now we're going to make a few changes to this before we add it. First, let's just name this. We're going to add a spotlight. So I'm just going to call it Spot. See where it says light type? There's 4 different options here. Probably the 2 options you're going to use the most are going to be spot and ambient. So let's start with a spotlight. Now there's all kinds of different controls here, but I don't want you to change any of these yet because you can't see the changes until we create the light itself, and it's much easier to see what these things do when the light has been created. So just go ahead and create a spotlight. Don't worry about any of these other controls. Hit OK. And then suddenly you should see a big change happen in your composition. Everything else kind of went dark, and we got this one kind of dim spotlight shining on the book. The second you start adding light layers, it removes that kind of general ambient light that was already there and replaces it with the lights that you're adding. So just be aware, once you start messing around with light layers, you are going to have to kind of start from scratch as far as lighting is concerned. Okay, so let's mess around with this spotlight and some of its settings. So to get back to settings, I will double click on the word spot, the layer down here. And let's just play a little bit. I'm going to go to my color. Instead of a pale blue, which is what I have right here, I might just change that to a little pale yellow to warm it up a bit. For intensity, let's take a look at that. We can start blowing that light out or really dimming it, depending on what you want. I'm just going to go 100% on the intensity. And there's a lesson to learn right there. Whenever you change a value, don't hit the enter key because it's going to close out your settings. Cone angle, okay, that's the size of the spread, so we can make that a really tight cone or really spread that thing out. So let's go 90 on this. Feathering, that's just the edge of that light. If I go full 100% feather, notice how soft. There's a completely hard edge. So maybe I'll go 50 on that. Check out this little box right here where it says cast shadows. Okay, you can determine if you want a light to make shadows or not. So let's say in this case we do. Let's go ahead and turn that on. And you can adjust the shadow darkness and diffusion. Now, you're not going to see any of this stuff show up in what we do today, but in the next lesson that we do, you'll start seeing this darkness and diffusion come into play better. So we'll get a better chance to look at that later. All right, that looks good for this light. Let's hit OK. Now let's mess around with where this light is pointing. Okay, so let's go to 5 seconds in. Then we get a nice look at the light up close, and it's really not hitting what we want. It's hitting kind of the bottom of the book, but we can't see the letters at all, so we need to make some adjustments to this light's position. Now, when you're working in the 3D universe, it's kind of nice to have multiple views to help you position objects. So you notice right here in this area on your composition panel, there's a button right here. It's called View Layout. And it's going to let us show more than one view of this composition. So let's go to the one that says 2 views horizontal. So this one right here, that's our active camera. We always want to have an active camera showing because it shows us what the composition is going to look like. But this one, let's use this one to help us position this light. So be sure to click here. Do you notice those little blue triangles in the corners of the active camera window? That shows you which view is active. So I'm going to click over here, and now those blue triangles are on this one. And I want to change that. Mine defaulted to right. I want to change it to top. Okay, so I've got the top view going. Let's start messing around with the position of this. So let's go to the spotlight, open up the position value, and let's start looking at what would happen if we do change some positioning for this. And maybe let's start with the Y value, the middle value. I'm just going to start dragging that. Okay, if I drag bigger numbers, you notice how it's coming from below. If I start going the opposite direction, we start raising that light. So the Y value is going to control basically the height of a light. And the more we pull that thing up, you notice it kind of accentuates the spread of the light more. So let me give you a value on this just so we're all kind of doing the same thing. Let's go minus 105. So minus 105, that's for your middle Y value. Let's take a look at the X position. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and drag that. Notice how that's kind of panning it left and right, and we can get that going more to where it's pointing at the letters better. And let me give you a number for that. Let's go minus 102. And that should shine it pretty nicely on those letters now. And then just one minor adjustment to the Z value. Let's go minus 208. And that should get it nicely on the letters. Okay, so again, we're just using those position values for the light to make sure we're aiming that light exactly where we want it to go. Okay, we can go ahead and close out the position for that, and we can go back to one view. We're done with the 2 views for now. All right, let's save what we have done. And if we go back, again, we can kind of see how everything's really dark still, so we might want to kind of add some light onto the book in the surroundings. So that's going to be something called an ambient light. So to add a light, again, remember the shortcut. Control, Alt, Shift, L. Let's name this ambient. Let's change the type to ambient. Just to kind of match the color of our surroundings, maybe I'll go a little bit more light blue for this. And I might knock down the intensity so it's not so overwhelming, so maybe 50% on the intensity. Notice there's fewer things to choose from for ambient light. Hit OK, and that should bring us back to life a little bit here. And you can look at the ambient values once the light's created. If you want to mess with the intensity, you can kind of see where you can put that depending on what you like, but I'll go back to 50. All right, so we've got our scene lit, but let's say we want to go with some kind of dramatic effect here. Let's say we want to mess around with flickering lights. To make lights flicker, you can probably figure out what we need to do. We need to have them go off and on quickly, and that's something that's called light intensity. So to set the intensity for a light, let's go to 315. Let's have all this kind of stuff happen here. So the first thing we're going to do is just animate that ambient light. We want the ambient light to fade in. Basically, the beginning of this composition is going to be pretty much a silhouette of the book. So let's get the ambient light to where it fades in. To get to all this light intensity stuff, just think of opacity transparency. That's the same shortcut for light intensity. So press T to open up that value. Let's go ahead and start the clock right there. Let's go back to 3 seconds. Let's go to 0 for intensity there. So there will be our little fade in for the ambient light. Okay, now let's go ahead and hide that value for ambient. Let's go to our spotlight. And let's begin all of this at 3:15 for the spotlight as well. So let's go ahead and get the clock started for the intensity there. But now we need to do this as more of a flicker, right? So let's go to 3 seconds. Maybe we'll have this do a slow fade in at the end. So it will fade in with the ambient light. So we will have the spot kind of fade in there, which is cool. But before that, we want a little bit of that flickering effect. So that just needs to be some really fast 0 to 100 changes, right? So I'm going to go to 228. And it's just going to be kind of off on. So 100 intensity, 226, 0, 224, back to 100. At this point, you might want to get a little bit more random, so we'll go 3 frames back. 0, 218, 100, and 215, 0. Now let me give you those numbers again because I know I went really fast for all that. So we're going to go to 3 seconds. I'm sorry, 3 seconds. So 3 seconds is 0, 228, 100, 226, 0, 224, 100, 221, 0, 218, 100, and then 215, 0. So it should be your flickering light effect right there. All right, so let's save that. And that's pretty cool. But we're going to add one last thing to this composition. We're going to go import something into this project. So this should be under that same folder that you had for the class on the Moodle page. We're going to go find this thing called brush. So select it. It's going to be a footage item. It's going to say, do you want merged layers? Yes, you do. So there's our brush layer. Now we're going to have this brush kind of come in as the camera is pushing past it, just to add a little bit of an effect to all of this. So let's go back to the beginning of our project. And let's go ahead and get brush down onto the top of our stack. Okay, now the brush layer is not 3D at this point, so we need to change it into a 3D layer. There's your cube. So go to the cube control, your 3D layer control, and just turn it on. And the second you did that, you should see some major changes. For one, it went completely dark, and also it moved it because it's just placing it in space here. Okay, now the reason why it went dark is because it too is reliant on the lights that are in this scene. So there's no light shining on this brush right now. That's why we can't see it. But we don't want these brush strokes to be reliant on light. We want them to be visible all the time. So there's a way we can change that. If we open up our layer, notice there's this thing called Material Options. Whenever you have 3D objects, you have this option. Now, let me show you the shortcut to get to this though. Okay, click on my brush, AA. AA is the shortcut to get to your material options. And this is going to deal primarily with how objects react to lights. So check out here. Let's look at accept shadows and accepts lights. They're both defaulted to on. We want those to both be off. So I click on accept shadows until it gets to off. You should probably have to click on it twice. Accept lights. Should click on it once to get that turned off. Everything should be back to normal now. We see that brush stroke fully lit up. Okay, so we can close out that layer for now. And let's open up the position. Now, if we were doing this for real, we'd be dragging this thing into place, but just to kind of speed things up, let me give you some numbers to help you position this brush. So let's go -6, 308, -2200. Remember those minus numbers, the bigger minus numbers bring things closer to the camera as the numbers get further away, especially because the camera's so far away. That's kind of why it's working that way for right now. And if we were to move that more to the zeros, it's going to get further away from the camera. All right, so we've got that brush in, and let's add an effect to this. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but we're going to add a wipe to this brush effect just to have it kind of come into the shot. So let's go ahead and add that. We're going to right click on brush, effect, transition, and then there is linear wipe. Okay, so let's go into our effect controls. Let's change a few things. Transition completion, let's go 100%. That should erase your brush for now. Don't worry, it's going to come back. We're going to animate this. Wipe angle, let's change that to -90 so it's going the opposite direction. And then let's add some feather to that. Let's go 50 on this, and I'll show you what the feather refers to here in a second. Okay, so once you get those values, 100% completion, -90 on the wipe angle, and 50 on the feather, let's go ahead and start the clock for transition completion. So just go up here to your effect controls, start the clock. Let's go forward to 15 frames. And at 15 frames, let's change that transition completion value to 0. So let's watch this happen here. So there is our brush kind of coming in like this. And I'll put it kind of halfway here just so you can see the feather. Notice no feather, it's just a hard edge, which doesn't look really good. So we can feather that out as much as you want to get the effect you like. Again, I'm going to go 50 on that. Okay, so we got this brush kind of animating in like that. And you notice once it gets fully in, the camera starts moving, and that's kind of cool how the camera kind of passes right by it. because that brush is fixed in space and we're just moving right over it, which looks nice. In fact, it looks pretty cool. We might want to add some more of those brushes. So to get more, we've already done this before, right? We just need to make some duplicates of the brush layer. So let's go to our brush. Let's Control D to duplicate that. Oh, let me undo that. I'm sorry, I should have told you something first. This will make it easier later. Let's rename the brush layer. So I'm going to name this brush left 1. And now I can duplicate it, because when I duplicate it now, it calls it brush left 2, which is pretty handy for the naming system. Okay, so I got my brush left 2. Let's do some position changes for it. So I open up position for brush left 2. And let's change those values. Let me give you some numbers. -238, 383, -523. If we go forward a little bit, you can see where it is. Now, again, if you were doing this on your own, you'd be messing around with these values to get you where you want it. You notice the biggest change is right there with that Z value, where we pushed it much further back, away from the camera, to give that illusion of depth. Okay, so we can go ahead and hide that position value. Let's make another duplicate. Let's go back down to brush left 1. We're going to duplicate it. And I want you to call this one brush right 1. Okay, now on this duplicate layer, we want this one to be on the opposite side. We kind of want 2 over here and then 2 over here to kind of get some stacking going on. So to get the right one kind of flipped over, let's do this. We kind of did this before with the reflection, right? We are going to right click on brush right 1, transform. We're going to flip it horizontal, but let's also flip it vertical, just to get a little different look to the ones on that side. Okay, so I transformed, flip vertical, flip horizontal to get that over where it's at right now. Okay, let's get some position values for brush right 1. So let's go 239, 320, and let's go -1680, which is a little further away than our -2200 brush here, but it's closer than the one right there. Let's make one final brush. So this time let's make a duplicate of brush right 1. Control D, brush right 2. I'm going to bring brush right 2 to the top of the stack. Position values for this one. Let's go 840, 360, and -400. That will be the closest one to the book. Okay, I can hide position, save that, and we're getting pretty close to being done here. One thing that would be kind of nice though, all these brushes kind of came in at the same time. It'd be kind of cool if they came in one at a time, right? Maybe have them staggered a bit. So let's just change some endpoints. Let's go to 10 frames in, brush right 1, and let's just push that one down to 10 frames. So that's that left bracket button again, right next to the letter P. So that'll push its start down to 10 frames. Let's go 20 frames in, brush left 2, to change the endpoint for that one. 30 frames in, that's going to be brush right 2. Let's just take a peek at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, which looks nicer the way that times out with the camera too. Okay, let's save that. Okay, we've got a lot of moving parts in this project, a lot of parts that might look nice with some blur added to it. So let's get the motion blur going. We've done this before, but let's go to our final comp here. Just click on brush right 2 at the top and then hit Control A. That should select all your layers because we want to add motion blur to everything. So now I just need to click the motion blur control for the top layer, and that will move it all the way down. But here's the problem. We've got a couple nested compositions here that we also need to go in and change the motion blur for them. So let's go into our book layer, our book composition. Same thing, Control A, motion blur to select all those. 3D text, there's a bunch of layers here. Let's Control A that, motion blur at the top. Back to final comp, I'm going to save this and I will get this loaded up as a preview and we can see what the final composition is going to look like. So we should have our animated camera, our animated lights. You see the blur coming in on those letters. And it's getting ready to load up. We'll see the final composition going in real time. There's the brush strokes moving through, and there's the end. Okay, so that is it for our 3D features lesson. Okay, that's it for 3D features. I had a whole week set aside for this lesson because it usually takes a longer time to get through in class. It didn't take quite as long to get through it, just kind of running through it by myself. But the next time we get together, we're going to start talking about another 3D tool, and that's something called the 3D Camera Tracker. So I hope everybody's doing well. We'll see you next time.